All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're digging into a framework that's completely reshaping how the largest state government in the US gets things done. We're going on a guided tour of the California Agile Framework. You'll hear it called CA-Agile to figure out what the whole deal is, how it works, and most importantly, why you should care. Okay, so first things first. To really get a handle on what CA-Agile is, you've got to understand why it even exists in the first place. And really, it's a tale of two very, very different ways of managing a project. So on one hand, you've got the old school, traditional waterfall method. Think of it like building a house. You pour the foundation, then you build the walls, then you put on the roof. Everything happens in a strict, rigid order, and you don't really see the finished product until the very, very end. But on the other hand, you've got Agile. It's a much more modern approach that's all about being flexible, working in small chunks, and delivering value piece by piece along the way. Right, so keeping that difference in mind, CA-Agile is basically the state of California's official game plan for using these modern, flexible ideas. It's a whole guidebook put together by the California Project Management Office to help teams run their projects in this new, iterative way, especially when it comes to big, complex IT projects. So here's what's on deck for our tour today. We've kind of covered the what's. Now we're going to walk through its core lifecycle, break down each of the three main phases, and then we'll wrap up by hitting some of the most common questions people have about how this all works in practice. So how does this framework actually get used on the ground? Well, the heart of it all is a brilliantly simple three-phase lifecycle. It really acts like a map for any project, no matter how big or complicated it is. The whole journey is broken down into just three logical steps. It's so intuitive. First, you understand. Then, you plan. And finally, you start doing. That's it. This simple flow is what guides a team all the way from a fuzzy idea to a real working service. So our first stop on this journey is phase 1, understanding. You can really think of this as laying the groundwork, the intellectual and honestly the cultural foundation for the entire project. You see, this first phase gets that you can't just flip a switch and suddenly be agile. That's not how it works. So this step is all about getting the entire team and even the wider organization on the exact same page. It's about making sure everyone's speaking the same language and is actually ready for what is a pretty big shift in how they work. And what does that look like? Well, it means learning the core principles, but it also means, and this part is huge, assessing the team's culture. For a massive organization, you have to ask the tough questions like, are we really ready for this kind of collaborative, fast-moving environment? A readiness assessment helps figure that out before anyone even thinks about writing a line of code. All right, so once everyone's on the same page and that shared understanding is locked in, the project shifts into phase 2, planning. Now that the foundation is solid, the team can get ready for the actual delivery. This is where the big ideas start to get real. The whole goal here is to move from the what-if stage to the how-to stage. You do that by really digging into the details and building out a clear, actionable strategy for the project. And you can see the shift right here, from abstract ideas to actual work products. Teams start writing user stories to make sure every single feature is looked at from the user's point of view. From there, they build out a product backlog and define the minimum viable product, the MVP. And that MVP part, that's absolutely crucial. It's the simplest, smallest version of the service you can possibly release to get it in front of real users and start getting feedback right away. And all that focus on getting feedback early, well, that leads us right into the final and most action-packed phase, doing. This is where all that planning and prep finally turns into a real, live, functioning service. Look, the goal here is pretty straightforward. Deliver something that actually works for the people who need to use it. This whole phase is just a continuous cycle. You build, you test, you learn, and you improve over and over again until the project is ready to go live. This right here is the rhythm, the pulse of Agile delivery. Teams get formed, the necessary contracts are signed, and the work gets planned in these short, repeatable cycles called releases. So instead of one massive, high-stakes launch at the very end, the project just grows and evolves. This whole process makes sure the final product isn't some big surprise, but is something that's been shaped by real feedback from the very beginning. All right, we've walked through the whole life cycle. So now, let's switch gears and do a little rapid-fire Q&A to tackle some of the biggest questions people have about how CA-Agile actually works in the real world of state government. Let's start with the big one, the question on everyone's mind. Is this thing a top-down mandate? Do state agencies absolutely positively have to use this new framework? And the answer, straight from the source, is nope. It is not mandated. It's positioned as a set of best practices, a really powerful tool that state organizations are heavily encouraged to use when an agile approach makes sense for their project. Okay, so if it's not required, how does it play with the frameworks that are already out there, the more traditional ones? Specifically, the California Project Management Framework, or the CA-PMF. Well, the short answer is they're for two totally different kinds of work. CA-Agile is the right tool in the toolbox for flexible, iterative projects. The older CA-PMF, that's the framework you stick with for those traditional, step-by-step waterfall projects. It's all about picking the right tool for the job. What about all the red tape? I mean, how does this new way of working affect the state's official and often very long project approval process, which is known as the PAL? This is a good one because CA-Agile actually helps here. It gives teams the structure and the guidance they need to get their approval documents in order. Basically, it helps them build a much stronger case for why an agile approach is the right one, and it shows the decision makers that they have a solid plan to pull it off. So when you boil it all down, what's the big takeaway? It's this. CA-Agile isn't just a new binder of rules. It's a whole new mindset. It's a modern, flexible, and deeply user-focused way of working that's designed to help government deliver better technology and ultimately better services for all of its citizens. And that leaves us with one final big idea to chew on. CA-Agile was really born in the world of IT, but its core principles, understand, plan, and do, iteratively, are incredibly powerful. So the question is, what other huge complex challenges in government could be totally transformed by this more flexible, more human-centered way of working? That's definitely something to think about.